Hi everyone. So I've been thinking about the Israelites and I've been wondering at what point did they go from being welcome guests in Egypt to an enslaved population? Let's talk about it today. So we all know the story of Joseph. We know he was sold by his brothers into captivity and then some traders took him and they took him with them to Egypt and that there he then started to work in the house of Potiphar. We know through an event of circumstances he ended up in jail, and then we know through the interpretation of dreams he came out of the pit, as the story goes, from the pit to the palace, and he was second to none other than Pharaoh himself. And then we know that Joseph was sent there to preserve his family because God knew famine was going to strike and they were going to seek refuge in a neighboring country, which they did. They ended up seeking refuge in Egypt. And because Joseph was there, they were welcomed, they were treated as royalty, they were given Goshen, a very fertile land where they were allowed to settle, manage their own affairs, thrive, grow, multiply. And so the people of God were thriving, though in a foreign land. Now, at some point, this Pharaoh, who knew everything about Joseph, ends up dying. And a new Pharaoh takes office, and he doesn't know Joseph from anyone. I mean, he does know what he's done, but he has no such affinity to him as the old Pharaoh who had worked hand in hand with Joseph through the dream interpretation. Joseph had been able to save Egypt from famine because he came up with the whole strategy of how they would weather the 7 years of plenty and put away for the 7 years of famine. Now, the new Pharaoh comes in, and this story, I guess, is far removed from him. Joseph has since died, and it's a whole new generation of the Israelites, and they've multiplied in numbers. And this new Pharaoh looks at them not as allies, not even as guests, but it looks at them as a threat. And so their oppression begins. So next thing you know, they're now being given hard labor, and now they're being contracted to build the cities of Pithom and Ramesses. And here they're subjected to harsh labor. Terrible, terrible treatment. And then when you do a bit of research, you also realize a lot was going on the political front. You notice that actually, let me just see that and read that for you. You notice that dynasties were changing hands. Historical records suggest that Egypt experienced changes in ruling dynasties during this period. The Hyksos dynasty, which are foreign rulers, may have been replaced by native Egyptian rulers who sought to unify Egypt and reassert control over foreign populations, including the Israelites. This change in leadership likely contributed to the shift in how the Israelites were perceived and how they were treated. But then again, when we look at what happened, we realize God had said this would happen in the days of Abraham. God had said that his children, his descendants, would go into captivity. This is in Genesis. Let me read that. This is in Genesis 15:13-14. Then the Lord said to him, "Know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, that they will be enslaved and mistreated there. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterwards they will come out with great possession." So this is God telling Abraham way before his descendants would go into slavery. Then the question for me becomes, why though? Why would God send his people into captivity, know that they would be thoroughly mistreated, but that they would then come out with great possession? It begs the question, what is God's method of promotion? It seems as if there's no way to rise without going down. It seems as if it takes troubled waters to build strong foundations, because whether we like it or not, this was the time upon which the Israelite identity was fully formed. This is what allowed for the law to be given. The oppression created a circumstance where God's power could be displayed through the plagues, the Exodus, and then the giving of the law. Okay, so when we read that God predicted this, God prophesied this, God told this to Abraham, when we read that God knew this was going to happen, it brings up a lot of questions for me, because these are topics I really used to struggle with before. And I think one of the questions it raises up for me is, does God's foreknowledge equate to causation? And that's one of the things we do when we read the Bible. We tend to think that everything that's written in the Bible, God permitted. Now, we do have God's permissive will, and then we have God's perfect will. Was it God's perfect will that his children go into captivity? I don't think so. Did he know that because there's free will that would happen? I would say yes. So what God continues to demonstrate his ability to work through human error, to work through humans' free will, to still bring about his will. So he knew the wickedness of the human heart, and the book of Jeremiah does say at one place that the heart is desperately wicked beyond anything we could imagine. So there was always a possibility that that would happen. There would be jealousy. The brothers would sell Joseph out. Joseph would then be enslaved. Hunger would strike. The Israelites would move in search for food or to avoid famine. There, the pharaohs would change. The people's heart would turn against them. They would then go from being invited, protected guest status to an enslaved population. God knew that would happen. It doesn't mean it's what God wanted to happen. He knew that he would still work out that situation for their good and for his glory. And he ended up doing just that. He was able to display his power through the plagues. He was able to vanquish the enemy on their behalf. He was able to do great works, get them across the Red Sea away from slavery. So God did end up performing his great works. And for me, that's one of the things that helps me understand the Bible better, because I've been dabbling in apologetics since I renewed my walk with God. And I'm learning to understand that everything that is written in the Bible, even God's foreknowledge of what is to happen, because he has bound himself to respect man's free will, some of these things will unfortunately happen. All he's chosen to do is to work through those circumstances to still bring about his will despite of what man does with his free will. So that's what I was going to share today. Okay, bye.